All right. So today, one little disclaimer before we start. So we're going to be focusing on a whole bunch of concepts around navigation and navigating to the content that someone might want to find. So one kind of disclaimer is that we're going to assume that either your content is already great and we're just focusing on getting people to the content quicker, or that you'll look at redesigning your content in the future. So today we are going to start off just by talking about all the different ways you can find content. We're going to go through a bunch of mistakes to avoid and go through a little case study of what not to do, so to speak, and then finish it off with a section on choosing labels and organizing content. All right, so let's get into it. But before that, I'll just go through a couple of fundamentals because there's some of the terminology that we talked to a bunch within this topic can be a little bit challenging to learn at the start. So we'll just go through some groundwork here. So what is an information architecture? You'll often hear me refer to it as an IA for short. What does it have to do with website navigation? What is wayfinding and why is it important for navigation in IA? And as well, what's a persona or mental model and why does that matter for an IA? So all websites start with a collection of a whole bunch of pieces of content. So you can think of this as all the different things that make up a website that someone might want to find to answer a question. So inevitably, there's actually natural groupings of that content that can be uncovered with a bit of research. Then within those groupings, there will also be subgroupings that can be uncovered as well. Sure enough, probably subgroupings within those subgroupings and so on and so forth. Then looking at all of these different groupings and subgroupings, you can create a larger, more organized structure based on the important tasks that people would like to do with that content. So you can see there's different levels, there's specific relationships between those levels. So ultimately, information architecture is really that structured relationship. And I'm probably oversimplifying here a little bit, but ultimately, I usually quote this definition from Information Architecture for the World Wide Web, which is a book. We've got a link to it at the end of the deck here. That's a really good seminal work for all things information architecture, kind of one of the first ones that actually described it in a very complete way. So the combination of organization, labeling, search, and navigation systems within websites and intranets. So then you can think of navigation as moving through that information architecture or IA in order to get to the content that you want. You can look at wayfinding is determining or using indicators on the page to determine where I am, where I can go from here, and where I came from or where I can navigate back to. And then the personas and the mental models. Ultimately, these are the thoughts, needs, and challenges of the people that are using your website. So there can be a whole bunch of different types of personas. We're not going to get into the details on that sort of thing, but ultimately just focusing on the levels and the different groupings are often aligned with different needs in mind for the people that are using your website. So that little bit of groundwork covered. Now we'll dive into just the ways to find content. So how do we find things on a website? I always find it's helpful to think of finding content in these two main ways. So people who browse first and people who search first. So both are really important ways to find desirable content on a site, and we'll need to support both models in our website design. So looking first at browse first. So some terminology here. We've got exploring on the left. So you can see that cat having a stroll time of his life, just kind of exploring that world. So you can think of it as traveling through some potentially unfamiliar territory to learn about or familiarize yourself with the territory. So a website example might be you get an ad in your email box from Icebreaker to learn about the new fall styles that they've released. You're not sure what you're looking for. You'll jump into the new arrivals area and start to learn about the new offerings for the season. Then we have on the right navigating. So you can see that focused look on that cat's face, trying to get at that mouse. So here you're moving through one page or section of the website to another, and often with a more focused goal in mind. So this might be that you're looking to upgrade an air conditioner or purchase one for the first time. So you know you want an air conditioner. You load up Best Buy and you're going through all of the navigation menus to try to find that particular area of the site so that you can learn more about that. So both these approaches, users are using components on each page and on-page content to find the desired content. So exploring the desired information is not necessarily known, and navigating the desired information is known, and the on-page components are used to find that information. And then we also have searching. So you're trying to find something by looking or otherwise seeking carefully and thoroughly. So a website example might be that you are missing a particular type of screw. So you load up the Home Depot website and you're using the search engine or on-page navigation elements to find a specific size of screw. So there's going to be times when people search first, effectively bypassing the navigational structure to find a page deeper within your website. And there's going to be times where people are browsing first. So they're using the navigation to explore or navigate. So it's important to flag that search is highly dependent on some things that aren't completely under your control when you're building out a website. And because of this, our focus for the webinar today is going to be on navigation or on website navigation, so more and exploration, so more on the browse first section. Okay, so some things that a good navigation enables. So it makes it easy for users to find things, makes sense to a first-time user, builds confidence in users, provides clear locations for information, and makes it easy for administrators to manage on the back end that are managing all of your content. So how does navigation show up on a website? So there's a whole bunch of different ways. So a bunch of them are listed there. So you'll likely use different types for different types of content. You'll likely use a combination of multiple types, if not all of these different types on your website. And we're going to go through each of these. So first off, we're going to talk about primary navigation. So this is often also referred to as global navigation. It's the consistent top-level navigation that appears on almost every page on your website. And often you'll see maybe a hover state if you hover over any of the items in that primary navigation. So here it's the hover state of over the rebates and energy savings section. So we also include that, that extra bit of navigation. So this hover state here as part of the primary navigation. If we're looking at a different example, here's one from the University of Brighton. The primary navigation is actually a bit smaller than the other example that we saw. So here there is a study here and research items in that primary navigation. And then the hover state is actually quite large here. So with this one, that's also referred to as our primary navigation. And we'll get into some details on the breakup of this, this hover state in another slide here. Then we have secondary navigation. So this is also referred to as local navigation. You'll often see this on interior pages of the website, sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. You'll find it hidden within mobile menus as well, sometimes on page within mobile devices too. But ultimately, it's for helping to navigate when you've already focused a little bit. So with here, it further expands and helps navigation while you're on an interior page of the website. And it's also important to start talking about wayfinding. So there is different elements on this page, which I've highlighted here. So you know you're in the accounts and billing section because you have this horizontal bar underneath it. You also have that same title showing up in the left navigation. There's going to be indenting and bolding, showing that relationship between those different levels. There's another wayfinding indication with this vertical bar, letting you know that you're in the billing and rates section. That's also bolded. And of course, that matches with the title. So a lot of different wayfinding indicators show up within the primary navigation and the secondary navigation to help you figure out where you are within this larger information architecture. Then there is also tertiary navigation. So it's the consistent supporting navigation that can appear in the header of a website. So when present, it often provides links that tend to be helpful to support users of the site, kind of wherever they are in the process. And for example, here, there's some emergency information. So in the Fortis BC example, we've got smell gas, electrical outages. These are the emergency information. So what to do if you're in those situations. The contact us link often shows up in tertiary nav. And here there is also account login, which often shows up there. Looking at a different example here, and this is where you'll start to see some of the personas and mental models show up here a little bit. So with the University of Brighton example, these two items are more about the topics that prospective students and researchers would find. So those tasks are kind of resonating with those people. In the tertiary nav, there's actually not as much overlap between the tasks that maybe a business and employer might do versus a prospective student or researcher. So they've actually pulled up some of these audience roles or these different mental models as items in the tertiary nav, which is a pattern that sometimes can work. Now looking at breadcrumbs now. So breadcrumbs show you a straight line path up through the hierarchy all the way to the home page. So in the Best Buy example, you can see that there are 3 levels of hierarchy above where the current page is for these AirPods. So it's really useful on deeper e-commerce websites, especially browsing or navigating, to be able to jump up and change that larger grouping or topic. And yeah, provides a link to each level of the hierarchy so that you can navigate through all of the different ones at ease. And then we have contextual navigation. So ultimately, this is in-page navigation that allows users to link to supplementary content or related content. So this can appear as above in what we call routing components or primary and secondary and tertiary callouts. So here, we call this a callout because it has high visual emphasis and it is directing people to a particular section. If you see the electricity rates, that's a less emphasized callout. So we'd probably call that a secondary callout, which still provides emphasis and routing for that other piece of content, but with less visual emphasis than the first one. And then we also have some in-page linking that can show up as well. Now, looking at our University of Brighton example, there's another couple examples of different callouts. We have our in-page linking that they've used, which can show up. There's our primary callout as well as our secondary callout. And the last type of navigation that can show up on pages is footer navigation. So footer navigation consists of an area at the bottom of each page. And sometimes this area is used for further navigation, sometimes not. It really depends on the site and the goals and the research that's gone into that website's design in order to figure out what you would want to surface up on this area. So this is often where you'll see social media links, newsletter signups, terms of use and privacy policies, and often support content as well. Looking at our University of Brighton example, here you can see they've also included the social links and some contact information, but they've also surfaced up some quick links. So I would think that these are based on research where they are particular pages that are of interest based on the research and the different personas and mental models of their audiences. As well, they do have some of those user role ones here. So really interesting to see the different types of footers and at least for me, starting to think about what kind of research might have gone into that kind of recommendation. And so just as I alluded to earlier, looking at that structured information architecture and all those levels in here, we can start to pick out those natural groupings just by looking at how the navigation shows up on the site and linking that to the different levels, if you could imagine that, that's kind of structured sitemap on below. So the main primary nav is often where the level ones appear. So in this example, study would be a level 1. Level 2 in our kind of hover state of that nav is often these bolded items here. So in the example here, courses and subjects would be a level 2. And then the level 3 ones would often be the items within that level 2 courses and subjects area. So find a course, A to Z course list, explore our subjects and academic subjects. So oftentimes you can look at different websites and figure out how that is showing up within your navigation. So bringing it all together, we have our header area. It's right in your face. It's often quite prominent. It weighs that primary navigation, the search, and the tertiary navigation all in one tidy header. Search gets prominence, at least in this example, and is in your face, and the page design makes it hard to miss. And then our primary navigation here, again, sort of mentioning that this is often based on heavy user research to figure out the different thoughts and needs and sort of challenges that people have, or the reasons why someone might go to a university site. And so then that's often what drives some of the primary navigation items. And then the tertiary navigation items as well, because sometimes, at least in this example, it's actually, there isn't much crossover, I'm assuming, between the needs of these different user roles and the needs of the larger ones that they've shifted the emphasis towards. So really interesting to see the different designs and think about what that research might have informed for this particular case. And then the exploration here with quite a large mega nav and that hover behavior here, which shows that second and third level. All right, so now we're going to move on to some mistakes to avoid. So what does a bad navigation enable? So the first one, it results in content duplication, makes it harder to find things. It actually breaks down over time as well. So we're going to go into a case study to show an example of bad navigation and how that makes navigation really, really challenging on a website. So the example I have here is from Zara, and one little disclaimer. So Zara has since redesigned their navigation since I took these screenshots, and they have addressed some of the issues that I point out here, but not all of them. So yeah, feel free to check out what they've done now and see how you might think about changing some of the things. But some of these issues definitely still exist. So some of the main navigation challenges here is they've depended on a small hamburger. It's tough to even pick out the primary navigation because it's so easy to miss with some of the visual design issues here. And then there's poor choice of background image with the text. So the text actually gets a little bit lost here. Now, we're not focusing too much on visual design as part of this webinar, but that does play a factor here, especially being able to pull out some of those elements. And so you can see, comparing to the University of Brighton example, how hard it is to find those primary navigation elements. So sales really hard to read. This is actually a carousel that navigates through a landing page for each of the different larger primary navigation categories on the site, but it's really easily missed. It's far away because the image takes so much of the emphasis. Now, looking at the expanded primary navigation menu, there are several challenges here. So here we've got an overwhelming amount of level 2 categories. So I think there is 27 individual options here, and that could be overwhelming to see all at once with no grouping here. There's some spacing challenges here. So there's a big difference or distance between these, which are actually our level 1 primary navigation options on the site. So there's a big distance between these and everything in this list. So that kind of breaks the association between level 1 and level 2. So it makes me question whether any of these are actually related to woman, which is a section on the site that is actually bolded here. And there's a mixture of level 1 and level 2 items, but they are all styled identically. So again, we're missing that logical grouping that you often see on websites, and it's tough to tell where you are because of it. So with here, because the woman title is bolded and all of these items are all below, one would assume that these are all within the woman section. But actually things like gift card and sale and Zara Atelier and home, a whole bunch of those are actually separate sections to the women's section, but they all look like they are part of the same area. Now looking at an interior page here. So bolding is used in three ways and all for completely different purposes. So it's styled the same, but they have different functions, which can make it really confusing to learn a website as well. So bolding is used as a call to action. So the view all has more emphasis. So that's used as a call to action there. It's also used as a wayfinding indicator. So that's where woman is used here with the bolding there. And then it's also used to denote an expanded menu item. And that's why bold or home is bolded here. So consistency is actually really important with the design of websites, but here that consistency is not being used and makes it really confusing. The wayfinding is really challenging as well to determine where you are on the site. So given what we've talked about already, one would assume that there's a home section within the women's section, but then there's also home as a level 1 section here. So it makes you kind of question, is home under women or is home its own section? Then there is also some indenting within this hamburger menu. So that makes you assume that sales and concepts and home kids and all of these items are within home. And that is partially true. But if you look at our previous screenshot, we had sales showing up at the same level as women when we had that expanded menu. So kind of makes you question where sales is on the website as well. What confuses things even more is you've got these two beauty sections. So you've got a level 1 beauty and then you have a level 2 beauty. And so that makes you kind of question where you are on the website as well. So the state shown here, here. So talking about home, it appears in both a level 1 and a level 2 item. So this is actually a level 1 item, and that is also a level 1 item. So the wayfinding, very confusing. And they're also disjointed from other items. So as I mentioned before, this bold is showing a state with an expanded section within this navigation. So all these items are within the home section. You can read them and you can make that connection, but with a big spacing difference here and all of these other items, it makes it tough to create that association. So that was a tough example. There's a lot of challenging things about that one. And yeah, that can show you how important it is to actually pay attention to applying those different wayfinding elements and making it really clear where you can go on a website. So our last section today is all around choosing labels and organizing content. So some concepts to keep in mind here. We're going to go through what makes an excellent label. We'll go through a little bit of guidance around the appropriate number of categories to use in your top navigation, as well as some of your other areas of navigation. And then we'll go through something called L.A.T.C.H principles. So what makes an excellent label? it's meaningful to people. So it must resonate for the intended audiences of the website, whether they're return visitors or those visiting for the first time. So this is where jargon can come up and really make it challenging, especially for first-time users, to understand your content and understand how to go through the navigation. So some examples here. I've seen references to medical legal, which is a very jargony term, which actually just means medical law. So something like that is a bit easier to understand. Affidavits in the legal space, that is really a written statement under oath. So that kind of thing is a bit easier to understand than the term affidavits, even though it is the correct term. So another thing that's challenging or something to keep in mind is when you're using sort of industry specific jargon, to make sure to pair it with something a little bit simpler so that those visiting for the first time can understand the content. Or even something like depreciation in accounting circles and finance circles. So worth less over time, it's something you could define once and then continue on. But those jargony things might not be as meaningful to people who are visiting for the first time. So something to keep in mind in terms of the larger labels. And then as short as possible, but without losing its meaning. So here's kind of a Goldilocks example here. So introduction to the theory of relativity as a title for something. It's decently long, it's accurate, but if you remove all of the rest and just say introduction, it could be an introduction to anything. And so introduction to relativity, that might be a just right example, because it's not too short and it's not too long. It's just enough, but you still have the meaning of the label. And then consistent grammar can be a challenge as well. Consistent grammar is definitely something we recommend. So another quote from the Information Architecture for the World Wide Web book: consistent means predictability, and systems that are predictable are easier to learn. So this is where we always recommend that consistency. So this can often come up with mixing different grammatical structures. So in the example here, you could have noun, so you're just saying programs. You could have a label that combines a verb and a noun, so exploring options. And then here's another variation of the same kind of verb plus noun combo, get funding. So this one uses the ing version of the verb, and this one does not. So making it a bit more consistent, I've just chosen for the example that third one. So search programs, explore options, get funding. So this one is consistent, it makes it more scannable and much easier to understand at a glance. And they're all saying essentially the same thing. And then the catch-alls. And this is something that is always a challenge. So catch-all labels don't help findability on a website, because they could mean many things to many people. It's actually a plausible place for almost any task to jump into. So it almost serves as a distractor, and the answer may or may not be in there. So we definitely do not recommend using any of these kind of catch-all sections for endpoints of content, for sure. So labels need to be specific enough to indicate what might be found in that section. Now, if you're doing your research and you're seeing these labels being used as part of an exercise like a card sort, which is a common exercise with designing navigation, these don't necessarily mean that because people are using these that you should have them on the website, but it is really interesting to see the mixture of different pieces of content that are grouped and labeled with something like resources, to get a sense as to the ones that maybe people didn't know what to sort with anything else. And so that is really the learning, other than the labels someone might have used to group them together. All right, so now, big question. What is the appropriate number of categories to use kind of in a top nav or otherwise? And the answer always is, it depends. So it depends on kind of content breadth, browsing or searching behavior, and potentially navigation item prioritization will also help you make some of these decisions on the appropriate number of categories. So content breadth, So you might need actually a larger number of categories if the breadth of the content for your website is quite large. So here's two examples. We've got Amazon, we've got Wayfair, big e-commerce sites. So those ones, because they have so much content, they can get away with having more navigation items in order to help narrow down in a quicker way. But sometimes if you're focusing on a specific topic, a small number of categories might actually be adequate. So here, some examples of smaller websites. We got Gooder Sunglasses, we got the Ocean Cleanup. So with Gooder Sunglasses, they just sell sunglasses specifically. So they have their 3 different ways of searching by community. So that's like, if you're a biker, here's some sunglasses for you. If you are a runner, here's some sunglasses for you. The different styles, because that's part of their brand, or the shopping kind of focuses on just diving into seeing all of them without narrowing down. So they're able to focus down quite a bit. The Ocean Cleanup, they have offerings or solutions for cleaning up garbage in our oceans and rivers. So they have those 2 offerings there, and then have focused on impact and then updates about the project. So they're able to keep that primary nav nice and succinct, and they're not necessarily using a lot of categories. And then the other thing to keep in mind, again, is that browsing versus searching behavior. So known item searching, smaller categories that could go deep could work actually. So here they've kept on Consumer Reports, they've kept the number of categories at the top relatively succinct. And then that hover state in that mega navigation, still keeping some of these categories pretty succinct, but allows people to narrow down quite quickly without being overwhelmed with options. Then there's also this example. So for browsing, so Alibaba has so many different products here, and you might benefit from a larger number of categories to start off to help people narrow down by seeing a lot of different options. So looking at our top nav here, we've got a smaller number of options at the top to get people in the right area, but then the categories, they have kind of a population-based category, top categories, and then some larger swaths, keeping that number in sync here, and then being able to narrow down quite quickly, and especially with so many products, that mega navigation helps people narrow down quite efficiently. So now prioritization of navigation items. So this is another one. This kind of leads into our L.A.T.C.H example, which is the last portion of the webinar. So prioritization from most popular ones first, or from left to right. So you already saw in our Alibaba example, they have a top categories area. It depends on how much content you have and if that concept actually makes sense for your use case as well. So leading into the different ways of organizing content, we have this acronym called L.A.T.C.H. And so ultimately that's location, alphabet, time, category, and hierarchy. So this was first coined by Richard Warman. So he's one of the creators of TED. And he also coined it in a book called Information Anxiety. And so with this one, so location is one way you can also look at organizing content. You'll often see this as you see in Island Health. They have different health unit locations. So that's a natural way to organize content there. Alphabet. So here we see our OXD.com people directory. So this is all arranged by first name here. The time-based, so you'll see this in newspaper websites or blog websites. So the time that an article or a blog post was posted can another way that you can organize content. And then these last two, so category and hierarchy, is where we spend the most of our time usually thinking really, really hard about in terms of what kind of categories and what kind of labels to use. So categorical, here we have an example from Legal Aid BC. So these larger areas of family law to help narrow down choices on this routing page. And then hierarchy. So this is where that kind of prioritization comes into play here. So this could be steps in a process. So here, the online divorce assistant with government of British Columbia. So the steps of the different content. Hierarchy could also be application stages or that sort of thing, or it's even time-based. So what you do before a process, what you do during a process, what you do after you finish the process. So big summary here, covered a lot of things. So we covered the ways to find content, focusing on how that information architecture is surfaced through the navigation of the site. And as well, this facilitates navigation through the content, but also exploration as well. We went through some mistakes to avoid. So the downsides of a bad navigation, and also went through an example when not applying these concepts could make it really frustrating for people. And then we talked about choosing labels and just organizing the content at a high level. So some guidelines on what makes a good label, what to consider when determining the appropriate number of categories, and the different ways to organize content at each level of your site. Now, resources-wise, I mentioned a bunch of them throughout the deck. So this book, if you're wanting to learn anything more about information architecture, this has kind of been the seminal work for quite some time, and it's stood the test of time. Also, information anxiety is a good read. We have our mental models, which if you want to learn more about that, and then Nielsen Norman Group has a great section on how many items in a nav menu. And that brings us to our Q&A.
Wow, thanks, Dave. That was really great. I think it was a really clear and easy to understand intro to like what could be a really complicated subject. So well done there. And I'm happy you shared those resources. I definitely encourage people to check them out. We've got a lot of questions. We aim to end this by 9:45 usually, but we'll stick around a few minutes later just to get to as many as we can. If you do need to drop, we'll email you links to the recording within a few days, so you'll be able to hear the answer to any questions. Otherwise, feel free to stick around just a few more minutes, and let's just get right to it here. So Dave, the first question here. Can you describe how the primary navigation and hover state translates to mobile?
Definitely. So with mobile, so there's I look at it from two different perspectives, and this is really about how deep your site might be. So for mobile, you're managing with a smaller area of real estate. So if you have a really deep website, it might actually be important to translate that mega nav, so allowing you to navigate through multiple levels also on a mobile screen. So that's for really, really deep content sites, that's often important. So with that smaller screen, having those level 1 categories shown, the ability to either click on them and it navigates to that second level where you see all of those items there. Clicking on another one navigates to that third one, so you can actually access all the levels of a mega nav through a smaller screen version there. Then when there are sort of more, I guess instead of deep, it's more shallow websites, that top navigation, sometimes you'll see it as a navigation panel on the bottom. You'll also see this in applications, so apps on your phone, where there's a consistent kind of topic-based navigation for the different main user needs, for example. So you might see a persistent navigation on the bottom, and then using things like a where to go next area on page on the bottom of the page, where you can, that would be the version of the secondary navigation that would actually show up. So we often in mobile, you're going to, because there's less real estate, you're going to focus on moving forward and then potentially having that top navigation where you can explore the full site again and start from the beginning. So it's a big topic they probably spend a lot of time on, but there's a couple of highlights on how that might translate to mobile.
Maybe that's another webinar.
Maybe.
Thanks, Dave. Your answer actually answered a couple of questions with that, so that's great, I think. Let's move on to, I'd like to ask, what are the considerations when choosing type of navigation for a project? E.g., Dave mentioned breadcrumb is commonly used for e-commerce websites.
Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, the breadcrumb. So this one is an interesting one because ultimately the breadcrumb does add some value in terms of backtracking to different categories, but you also need to strike a balance with the other types of navigation that you've added. So if you have a primary nav that has a big mega nav, you also have a secondary nav that shows everything within a section, you might not even need a breadcrumb because you can see a lot from the top nav and you can see a lot in the secondary nav. So adding an additional layer from that with all those wayfinding indicators actually doesn't help the user that much. But when it gets really, really deep, it can be helpful to be able to backtrack different categories. So really, there's a balance to strike with use of a breadcrumb and the types of designs that you've picked for the secondary nav and the primary nav. Sometimes the secondary nav could just be the section you're in and then beyond, and then it doesn't include maybe the level 1s or the level 2s. And so in that one, maybe a breadcrumb might be more helpful to keep because it allows you to navigate back. So really it's striking that balance between all the different types so you can make sure you're not adding redundant elements to your site.
Great. Next question here. What are the tools commonly used at OXD to uncover user mental models so as to create an IA? I guess I got an AI on the brain. There was no AI question, so I'm surprised, but yeah. To create an IA that meets user needs. So what tools do we use to create an IA that meets user needs?
Yeah, it's a combination of user research as well as specific research techniques for information architecture. And yeah, it's kind of a combination of both of those. So starting any project, wanting to learn more about the people that visit on your site. So that's often through one-on-one user interviews. There is other techniques like empathy mapping. If you can't get access directly to the users, you can talk to the people that deal directly with users and you can build up an empathy map is kind of a technique for learning about the thoughts and challenges and sort of jobs to be done of the people that use your website. And from those, you can build a picture that you can then validate with additional research. So that's kind of one technique to learn more about those needs, is getting out there and talking to people. And if you can't talk to the people directly, you talk to the people that talk to the people directly. And then for information architecture, we typically will use techniques like a card sort. So having people be given a whole bunch of different cards that they can arrange in groups and then pick a label for each group. That just through what words they use to pick the label, that can give us a high level sense. So think about the level 1 and level 2 structure of a website on that rough grouping. And then we can do different pieces of research like task testing to start to figure out some of the different ways that people are resonating to a set of labels that you've chosen. And task testing is kind of like a choose your own adventure, or you're on a little scavenger hunt. You're given a task, you're given an IA, and you try to figure out where it's going to be. And this can let you know how well things are resonating. And then you can keep on iterating on those different concepts.
Great. Thanks, Dave. So we still have a lot of questions, but I think we'll just squeeze in one more and let people get back to their lives and their day jobs. There's a really specific one here. Curious to hear your thoughts on. We've got 2 search fields, one that follows the user on every page in the top right where it's typically found. We also have a search field in the middle of the homepage. Heat mapping shows that both are used. I'd like to simplify the homepage. Any risk in removing the middle homepage search?
I mean, it's tough to answer this question without seeing the context of use, but ultimately, I mean, I think having like, we usually like to get our feedback from the people that use the website and try to test it out. So I would recommend probably throwing together a little prototype, testing search with the search missing and getting some feedback and seeing if people miss it at all. And just doing some testing with people, and that can be really quick and easy to do. 3 to 5 tests with individuals, and you'll learn a lot of other things. We always recommend usability testing overall, but if you remove it and you're not seeing people be hindered, especially if you have a working search, then you kind of know that, hey, maybe that is something we could consider. Keeping in mind that a search directly on the homepage is only exposed when people are on the homepage. And if people do have questions when they get deeper on the site, then having that consistent search in a location is always handy to have.
That's a great answer, Dave. And as always, the key to user-centered design is user research. So the answer to the question is, let's find out. Let's get the users involved and see what the best answer is. So thanks again, Dave. That was really great. Thanks for sticking around a bit later. Your experience and knowledge, I think, has been really valuable on this topic. And thanks to all our guests for attending. For those questions that we didn't get to, we'll pass those along to Dave and look at getting you some answers to those. If you do want them, just email us so that we have your email and know where to send those answers. So yeah, and we'll have the list of resources in the follow-up, and you just check your email over the next few days. And then other than that, just let us know if there's any other topics you'd like to hear more about, and just email us at marketing@oxd.com. Other than that, thanks again for joining us. It's been great. Thank you again, Dave, and everyone behind the scenes at OXD here that made this possible. And have a great week. Take care.
So thank you.